money much more from a charitable perspective. And it wasn't until we decided to create a cultural component to the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre, that I was, I dove deeply into that project and started to understand the power of economics, the ways that it was practiced by the people who lived in Tulsa that were displaced after the massacre, but they went back to their community and pulled resources together and rebuilt their community. And that left me with a burning question about, that was 100 years ago. What would Black Wall Street look like in the 21st century? And so designing this project, the Black Wall Street Journey, is an opportunity to just kind of look at and explore and learn about, what are we doing in terms of Black economic health. And the first thing I started to realize as I started to explore and investigate this, is to realize that it's not a common public conversation that happens. I mean, I spent a lot of time Googling and trying to figure out, what's finding information about Black wealth, and there's just not a lot about Black wealth. And when you do find things, it only talks about the deficit between the deficit between Black and white wealth. So that kind of led this path to really just kind of look at and trying to figure out, how do we talk about Black wealth? Who's talking about it? And I was very fortunate to meet Natalie Moore along the way, who has been writing about
when you look at him on Zoom versus Mr. Amos, he's
so
just smoother.
Excited and happy when she joined forces with us on the Black Wall Street Journey team, and bringing her expertise, her writing, her research, her connections, her network to lead this series. So very excited about that, and I'm really excited so I'm here mostly just to listen and learn. This has been my process of trying to understand, how do we dig in and find ways of shifting the narrative around Black economics, and how do we do that in a way that helps empower us to empower communities around the country. And so I'm very excited about the speakers that Natalie's put together today, and so I'm just going to turn it over to Natalie and let her get going, and I'll get my pen and paper out and take notes. Thank you.
Great. Good evening, everyone. I'm so happy to be a part of this project. I'm really grateful for Rick for bringing me on. It's been 2.5 years that we've been working on this in some way. And so I'm pleased with the folks who are here today, because they're either friends of mine or folks who or folks whose work I admire and also get to amplify in my own reporting. So let me first introduce Keewa Nurullah. She's a performing artist and owner of Kido, a children's clothing boutique in the South Loop that I am a frequent visitor of. As an artist, she has toured domestically and internationally, performing for legends such as Quincy Jones, Julie Andrews, and the late Robin Williams. As a shop owner, Keewa focuses on colorful unisex clothing and representation for children of color on apparel, books, and toys. She is a Black Wall Street descendant and dedicated to Black entrepreneurship and community building in Chicago. Keewa is a dedicated wife and mother and enjoys creating memories with her husband, Doug, and their 2 toddlers. Richard Wallace is the founder and director of Equity and Transformation, known as EAT, an organization which fights for social and economic equity for Black workers in informal work and those who have been formerly incarcerated. EAT is involved with research, advocacy, policy development, community organizing, and podcast production. He is currently the board president at Working Family Solidarity. Prior to working at EAT, he was with the Workers Center for Racial Justice and the Chicago Workers Collaborative. And Damon Jones is an associate
There's a way
professor
to
at the
just
University of
screen share from
Chicago
Facebook.
Harris School of Public Policy. Damon's current research topics include income tax policy, Social Security, retirement savings, and the interaction between employer-provided benefits and labor market outcomes. At Harris, Jones currently teaches a course on public finance and public policy, a course in advanced microeconomics, and the practicum taxes, transfers, and nonprofits. He was a postdoctoral fellow at the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy and Research and is a faculty research fellow at the National Bureau of Economic Research. Welcome to you all, and let me ask, what are you all eating? Are we raising a glass? I only have water in a locked room in hope that Keewa's little friend Faraz doesn't come busting in here when she gets home from school.
Ooh, yeah, I'm like many parents, deprived of nourishment right now. All I have is a box of tissues, but I could give you a list of what I do enjoy when children aren't around, for sure.
I have with me some Gosling ginger beer. Normally, I would have mixed this into a dark and stormy, but it's not dark.
Today is dark and stormy day. Did you know that?
Oh yeah, there's a day.
Today is dark and stormy day.
There's a day for everything.
I know.
Gotta sell this Gosling. So I have the ginger beer part of it, and that'll be what I'm raising this evening.
I guess I'm raising a LaCroix. It's been my pandemic pickup. Is I got addicted to sparkling water, like a lot of my friends. And so yeah, that's my drink for the day, and it's a watermelon LaCroix. All right, yeah.
Great, and a reminder to our audience, you can submit questions in the Q&A, and you can also do that on Facebook. Keewa, I would like to start with you as a Black Wall Street descendant. Can you tell us your family story?
My family story is, I feel like a very dynamic one, but it's also a very, there aren't a lot of details either. So at the same time, I'm glad to have something, but I also wish I had more. My great-grandfather had a tailor shop on Black Wall Street, and when the massacre was taking place, he had to find a way out with his wife, my great-grandmother, my grandfather, who was just a baby at the time, and my great-aunt, who was a toddler. And thankfully, a customer of his was able to get the family out by hiding them in a wagon or a truck underneath, like literally some bales of hay. Very dramatic. Somehow, there are a lot of pieces of the story we don't know. We don't know if this customer of his just got them out of the city limits or took them further and was leaving. But they got out and they made their way to Chicago. And thankfully, his story is one of resilience because after all of that trauma, not only did they have a lot more children, but he was able to reopen his tailor shop and he taught my grandfather the trade. And so at one point, I forget which was where, but at one point, my great-grandfather and grandfather both had tailor shops on 47th Street and 63rd Street. And yeah, just kind of kept on keeping on. Kept on.
Do you know why they moved to Chicago? Why they chose Chicago?
I do not know, because as far as I know, there was no family waiting for them on the other side. I'm not sure there were so many people in Chicago, obviously, that migrated that were from somewhere from the South. But as far as we know, they weren't traveling with anyone else, and they were going to an unknown, an unknown city.
One thing that has been coming up a lot for people is the fact that they never learned about this in school or in history books. And I'm wondering, what was the oral tradition in your family? Was this something that, because it was so traumatic, it wasn't talked about and you got bits and pieces? Or did your grandfather, he would have been too young, but were there stories passed down to him that he shared with your mom, with you, other family members?
Yeah, I think unfortunately our family suffered from what you said, which was that the event had been so traumatic that they really didn't talk about it. So unlike us, where, we're going to therapy and we're talking about our feelings in 2021, they literally kind of put the past behind them. I mean, all the Black people knew about what happened in Tulsa when they came to Chicago. But as far as telling the next generation and the next generation, I remember getting very few bits and pieces from my grandfather. But yeah, it just wasn't really talked about. And I don't know if I've just been kind of reconciling all of this as it kind of gains popularity in the last few years. But as a child, I don't remember it feeling like something I needed to dig into, honestly. Because it wasn't taught in school, because I didn't have a friend or anybody who even knew about it, you grow up feeling like it's not important. And so I literally I didn't know that it was something that everyone should know. And so growing up, it really was just a piece of family history. And I felt a whirlwind of emotions these last few years, learning more and more details about it, just like everyone else. But it kind of just hits different, it's like all of a sudden, the Pandora's box is opened and everybody knows this thing that's like personal to me, but I'm learning too. It's been very bizarre, but I've been so thankful to just get more. I mean, we literally just found out the address of where his shop was and where they lived. And we didn't even have that piece of information before it. So it's just been crazy, but I'm thankful that, the light has shined on what happened. And yeah, that's all I can say. It's been very, very bizarre, but, thankful that people are learning about another one of these horrible incidents,
Yeah. Richard, you and I have talked about the invisibility and the visibility of people in the underground economy. If they're under the L, someone loose cigarettes, we see them, but we don't think about them. Tell us why you started EAT and how you've been able to really shift this conversation about this segment of the economy, or if you feel like, I feel like you have, but what has that experience been like for you?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's good to see you. Hopefully we'll be doing this at a dinner table one day soon.
Yes.
And I'm, grateful to be on the panel with some people I also follow and look at their work, and so I'm kind of having a moment here right now, but I'm really grateful to be on the panel. The question for me is, I started organizing in the temp labor sector, organizing temp workers in the staffing agencies throughout the state of Illinois. And my job there was what they call the Bringing Down Barriers organizing. And so I was bringing down barriers between Black and Latino temp workers. At the time, there was a lot of tension around, access to employment and exploitation. So discrimination and exploitation. One end, the Black workers were being discriminated through things like background checks. On the other end, folks were being exploited, right, due to their documentation, right, or being undocumented. And so we would pull together conversations between Black and Latino workers, and there was also tensions between the two groups, because there was the assumption by Black workers that Latinx workers were being chosen first. and they were privileged in being chosen first, and that they were chosen last. And it was, I mean, at face value, that was the experience. But when we were able to bring down barriers, like we had a conversation, we brought in interpreters. Language was one of the first barriers. And we brought in interpreters, and we learned that it wasn't about privilege. It was actually about exploitation. And they were able to pay, they were paying the undocumented workers under minimum wage. There was a number of people who were victims of sexual violence and had nowhere to turn. And so the black workers were like, well, I didn't know that's what was going on the job, right? And then I wish they would, came up a few times in the conversation. But through that, we're able to bring about some solidarity and change some conditions in the temp labor sector. But for me, and then after that, I went on to get another job working at the Workers Center, and then I was the Illinois campaign director for a place called Jobs Move America. We did inclusive procurement work in the state of Illinois. And so that job, big CTA contract rendered, we brought rail car development back to Pullman, right? That was the thing that we celebrated. But in reality, it was $1.3 billion that came down through the CTA to redevelop rail cars. And it produced 300 jobs. And I remember going back to my desk and looking at the numbers, and I was like, 300? Unemployment rate in the black community is, how many black folks are unemployed? And I was looking at it, I was like, this is the drop in the bucket. There are so many unemployed black folks in the city of Chicago. Who's organizing those people, right? And so I began at that point, I began to think about how do we actually create a vehicle to amplify the voices of informal workers in our democracy. And that means the folks who are boxed out, even of the political games, are in the political world. Folks that are in street economies, folks that are in street tribes, all right? Folks that are uncounted in a number of different ways. Like, how do we begin to build out an instrument to really amplify their voices in our movement spaces, in our communities, in our democracy? And we landed on E, right? I was in South Africa at that time, and I thought, for me, it was like, I thought we hustled in Chicago. But until you go to like another country, you realize that we don't hustle that hard, right? Like there's, as soon as I got off the plane, it was like pure water, peanuts, coconut, mango, and I remember asking one of the guys when I got off the plane, like, where is the drug trade? Right now, I wasn't looking to buy anything. I just was like, in Chicago, and they were like, well, we have access to all of this, right? And so we can fish and sell the fish at the market. And so I was looking at informality a different way. And so I came back to Chicago, kind of I found the mission, and I was in a fellowship called the Atlantic Fellows for Racial Equity at the time, and collectively we came up with the vision for the organization. And then they provided some seed funds, and we started the organization in 2018. And that's really, it kind of came through an experience of working on the ground with people, seeing the gaps, seeing who was included in conversations, who wasn't. And then like cases like Eric Garner and Alton Sterling just were in my face in the moment as well. And it was like, yeah, he was much more than just a black man standing on a corner. He was doing something. What was he doing? Right? And what he was doing was selling loose cigarettes. And that is an occupation in the informal economy. And so we positioned ourselves to be, uniquely centered around black informal work.
Damon, I'm sure you heard, although you probably didn't need ProPublica to do this for you, the study, the article that came out about American uber rich, the richest 25 Americans pay less in tax than many ordinary workers do. Can you talk about your work, tax policy, Social Security, how that contributes to this racial wealth gap?
Sure. And thanks for having me. It's good to see new faces and familiar faces on the panel tonight and to chop it up. Also, apologies, I have to say disclaimer because I'm currently working. So everything I say is my own, my personal views, not the views of the White House or the federal government. I
don't think I mentioned that part of your bio because you are you're on leave right now, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm on leave right now Council of Economic Advisors and why. But these are my personal views tonight. So, yeah, I haven't poured through that article, but I'm aware of these general issues, and I have seen headlines in the discourse around this report from ProPublica on the ultra wealthy, and I would say that there's a number of ways historically and currently that you can see how these tax laws, other types of social programs, how they have a huge impact on these wealth gaps. Historically, we can look at how the laws have been designed to exclude certain groups, including Black workers, for example. So we had like fair labor laws that were passed that introduced minimum wage rates, and then they excluded certain types of workers that were disproportionately workers in the South, and then that, politically was sort of pushed by those who employed those workers in the South to kind of maintain their leverage. So that helped them to continue to do the type of exploitation that Richard was talking about. And then there were other policies that were hugely pro-social, like Social Security. And certain types of workers were not initially qualified for Social Security. Their wages were not covered, so for years, certain types of workers, like domestic workers, were barred from Social Security, and that also disproportionately affected Black workers. So there were a number of these major New Deal policies that were passed that excluded us during the time when middle classes were built in the United States. And so that really contributed to these gaps. And then currently, an interesting thing that I was thinking about when Richard was talking about the informal workforce. In my scholarship or in academia or policy, people, when they talk about informal work, they often talk about, that makes it harder to get benefits to people. When people are working informally, it's harder for us to know what the state of workers in that position are. And that, formality is somehow seen as a better path to tapping into a lot of these benefits and enjoying, more prosperity. But if you look at the ProPublica article, a lot of very wealthy people are happy to be invisible. They're happy for their wealth to be invisible to the system. They can move their wealth overseas. They can not tap into their wealth throughout their life and then just pass it on to their heirs and avoid taxes. So it doesn't have to be the case that because the system can't track you, that is at a disadvantage to you. If you have power, you can still enjoy a lot of benefits from society and advantages and privileges. And so I think that just underscores, that in addition to economic investment, if you have power and political power and leverage, that is important to making sure that you have a fair share of this, the surplus that we have socially as a society. So tax policy is very complicated, but it can be manipulated to the advantage of those who have a lot of leverage and power, and those tend to be people who are also wealthy. And so those things can be used to even the playing field, or they can be used to recreate or perpetuate the inequality that we see.
Keewa, can you talk about some of the challenges that you faced in becoming a small business owner? Pre-pandemic, of course, I know that has hurt so many people, but we always hear about barriers to capital, barriers to business owners opening, and what was your experience like?
Oh, wow. I feel like most of my experience has been, or challenges rather, in terms of the business has come from access to knowledge or information. Before this pandemic boom of people wanting to give as much money as they can to small businesses and providing all of these resources, when I started my business, there was like a super dry City of Chicago website. And if you didn't know what to click, it's like you're wading through, foggy skies. I feel like, first of all, I'm an artist, and I'm an artist who, before having the business, didn't really feel confident, saying I knew a lot about money or business because I had never pursued anything thinking that, with the first priority being how much money will I make, So not only having an untraditional path to entrepreneurship, but once I started the business and looking for answers or resources, it just wasn't as readily available as I would think. I've always, so when I think of Black Wall Street and we all think about how a utopia exists of Black life, I think the most powerful thing when I imagine what that could have felt like is just having other people right next door who are going through what you're going through, And so growing up, not only did I not know a lot of Black entrepreneurs in my neighborhood, but once I returned to Chicago after living in New York and abroad for several years, I had a few friends, but there just wasn't a connecting tissue of real, just resources and is there a monthly or a quarterly or a semi-annually meeting of people to share, this knowledge that we need to be Black entrepreneurs? The one that I could find. And so a lot of my entrepreneur journey has felt lonely, of just trying to find answers that don't seem like they're out there for me. And when I go to look for those answers, I know where to look because I know who has them readily available. And that's, that's people who have always had access to money and resources. So what was your original question again? Because I've just
no, you're answering it. Challenges. So the knowledge was a challenge. Was capital a challenge?
Capital was a challenge until last year when everybody wanted to give money to Black businesses out of nowhere. Definitely. I never felt the confidence of, I'm an artist. So I've never had a 9-to-5. I've never had a steady, even the paychecks and the pay stubs that I have that I know made me a lot of money. I know that whenever I tried to buy a car or anytime I've looked to a bank for, hey, can you just give me the benefit of the doubt? My artist resume does not fill the requirements for what they need. So even in starting my business, I knew that however stable I thought I was, I never felt the confidence of first of all, I'm a Black woman. Second of all, I'm an artist. Third of all, I don't have any other businesses or things that I've done to have any track record. And so I almost counted myself out of the running and tried to just keep the bank out of it because I felt like I knew what they were going to say. And I do feel like that lack of confidence in the relationship between the entrepreneur and the bank is, something that I know that's not uncommon,
Why did you your store is definitely artistic, and the community that you have created feels artistic for, families with young children. But why did you decide to open a physical store?
Honestly, because at the age that my children were at the time, it was getting harder and harder to execute without having a home. So we were online for 2 years, and I was slinging onesies and t-shirts all over the city with, hauling big tables and pitching tents and sweating my little booty off with a baby on the carrier or dragging a toddler around. And I just, as time went on, I knew that just wasn't sustainable, and so we were having events and all of these in-person things as well. And I knew, I just knew to take it to make it easier on myself, and also just with the goal of I think that's a goal of having a successful business, is just to have people see it. To me, online is great, but it's kind of invisible. You're like in a black hole of everybody in the whole universe. So I know I had a feeling that to just really feel like I made it, people would have to see me. They would have to see Kido. They would have to stand up next to other people, and we would have to hold our own to really prove that we were a viable business. Did we have to do that? No, but I definitely felt like I couldn't sling onesies all over the Midwest anymore. People were going to come to me, so you just gotta come to me now.
Richard, how do you get people in the informal economy into employment that is consistent, that pays them, and with benefits?
That's a hard question. The market's got to produce the jobs. It's really about, I think I've always been, I've gotten a question similar to this since we started. Is our goal to formalize informality, right? Or formalize the informal economy, the informal set of, sectors in Chicago, and it's not. It could be a latent, a latent result of our work is that more people may have access to employment. My goal right now is really to organize within the informal sector, really begin to produce a robust research or database on Black informality in Chicago, and then allow for Black informal workers to begin to advocate for policy measures that they support, right? And so that could look like, expanded peddlers licenses, right, which would then make some of their occupations formal. It could look like, reduced tickets and fines for people who are caught selling loose cigarettes, right? It could look like, the cannabis legalization piece that we played a part in, right? The recreational cannabis in Illinois, and trying to ensure that this policy retains the legacy cannabis workers in the new recreational cannabis economy. And so it looks different depending on where the workers are, right? I know that Damon might have a better sense of these statistics, right? But there's over close to 80,000 unemployed Black folks in the city of Chicago. There needs to be a surplus of 80,000 jobs to meet that demand, right? And so I don't know if there's a surplus of inaccessible jobs that's waiting for our people to join, because I think that's also the notion in most folks' heads that lead into that, we lazy, we don't want to work, we don't want to da-da-da-da. It's also generally functioning in an idea that there's a surplus of jobs waiting for us that we just won't walk into. And the reality for a lot of the folks that we've engaged in, their hustle, right? Their informal occupation is generally the only thing that they've had access to on a consistent basis for decades. And these are often hustles that were passed down from generation to generation to generation. Buddy selling peanuts off the side of the road. His granddaddy did the same. These aren't, and there's a lot more trends to be discovered the more we do the research. But ultimately, they came in, this is post-industrialization, right? So this is when the jobs left, you've seen increase in informal activity. And so it's hard to say, definitively, like if the end result will be that. I think at the end of the day, what we want to see more of is, decreased criminalization of people who are engaged in informal activity, and yeah, and so I think that's more or less one of the things we're trying to address.
I'm working on a story now. The Illinois legislature passed a law giving more leeway to cottage food workers, which are basically home-based kitchen cooks. And before, they could only sell at farmers markets, and you couldn't sell your bread on. I mean, these are people who are, and we all know, people are baking a lot of bread in the pandemic. So, baking breads and jams and pickles and cupcakes. Now you can sell them on your front porch. You still have to have some licenses, and so I was doing an interview about that before this webinar, and I had asked, well, how many cottage food workers are in the state? And there's no database, and each county or municipality does that. And I said, all right, well, I'll FOIA the city and find out what they have, City of Chicago. And the lawyer said, we found out that there were so few people who were actually registered in Chicago because the law was so tough that they just didn't even bother. So I know that it's more than a couple of dozen people making birthday cakes on their block for people.
True. Yeah.
But have you talked about wanting to have a database and having folks in this economy say what they want. Have you heard any specific policies or things that people are saying, you know what, I want it to be easier for me to do X, Y, Z? Yeah.
No, I think our people are extremely resilient, and so they're doing it, right? Like they it's not like, I don't think that they're waiting for the state to give them approval on the decisions that they got to make, right? Like it's like we have a lot of folks that are hair braiding, right? We have folks that are ride sharing. There's also there's a whole nother ride share outside of Uber system in the city of Chicago. Folks should be aware of. They're preparing foods. They're preparing their childcare providers, right? Like you got to think, how much you paying for childcare right now? If you're a Chicago resident that's making the average per capita income, it's taking a lot of your check. I know that we spend equally as much on our childcare as we do on our mortgage or whatever, right? And so if you're in West Garfield Park, where the average per capita income is $12,000 a year, just about $12,000 a year, how are you being able to afford childcare at the same rate as everybody else, right? And so there obviously are these. The city depends on the informal occupations that exist in order to, smooth over the hard points, right, that the city doesn't want to recognize, right? But the reality is that informality is saving our communities in a number of ways. And so I think there's this, I think a lot of folks would be like, if they could have a formal business, they would. But then a lot of folks, I'll say this too, a number of the members that we met off Madison and Springfield, they actually have informal street vending businesses outside of brick and mortars that their ancestors used to own. So they were priced out, whether it be credentialism or other eligibility criteria, basically boxed them out of like the ownership, that brick and mortar ownership, right? And so they're doing the same thing that their grandparents were doing or their family members were doing. They're just doing it on the street, right? And so, I think if the rubric to acquire a formal business was conducive to folks from lower income communities immediately, I think that there'd be an increased rate of inclusion, right? But as long as it's like you got to jump through all of these loops, right? You got to go to the ZBA, you got to go. Then we're going to consistently see, our folks choose alternatives, right? I think we're seeing some of the same trends show up in like vaccinations and vaccination accessibility, right? Like it was in the beginning, right? It was, it was a very complex rubric that folks had to climb through in order to get access to it, right? And so that is accessibility is also an extremely important piece that needs to be addressed before we can get to what you were saying.
Damon, is there anything that you can respond to based on what Richard said about the unemployment rate in Chicago, how many jobs are needed, or if you've even thought about the informal economy within your own research and how that fits in?
Yeah, no, there was a lot to respond to. I'll try to pick up on a couple of points made. The first thing I'll say is, like, I do agree with Richard that, like, a lot of times people will look at a certain pattern or in the Black community and ask, like, how can we help people make better decisions? And like Richard is saying, like, a lot of times people are choosing the best option available to them. So when people go into an informal economy of self-employment, sometimes that's because the other options, weren't as attractive. We'd have to assume that if they were, people would be doing that instead. So like Richard was saying, like, if the labor market in general is inclusive or accessible, if the things that get you, the hurdles you have to get over and to get into certain types of careers, educational, and then in terms of licensing, occupational licensing and things like that, if those are not too prohibitive, why wouldn't people go there? And if they're not, part of the problem may not be with, like, convincing people to make different decisions, but the environment that they're in is giving them the best option is the one that's being taken. So I think that's always important to think about how are things designed, and is it that people are just not choosing this, or is it's not as accessible as people may think, these routes. The other thing that I was going to say is that I think that I also I like what Richard brought up about decriminalization. So it's particularly, like, there's a history in this country of really putting Black people between a rock and a hard place. So the oldest version of that was enslavement, but then after that was no longer on the table was that, what was I reading? So maybe in Tulsa, maybe it's actually either in Tulsa or North Carolina, where they said, like, they weren't seeing as many Black women working, taking care of people's children or working domestically as they would have liked, and they tried to institute laws that would make it illegal for you to not be employed, basically by white people. So things like vagrancy laws and also other types of laws that were on the book that just said, like, if you are an able-bodied Black woman, you need to be working for and domestically in someone's home, or you need to have some sort of, like, someone vouch for you to show that you are gainfully employed, or you'll face legal consequences. There's a history of using those laws to make survival outside of exploitative work arrangements very difficult, push you into back towards what was a sweet deal for white people, which was enslavement. So these types of things that make it illegal to work or to try to make ends meet, they have a history. So that's something else that I'm reminded of, that two-pronged strategy of a very unattractive formal labor opportunity and then making it very hard for you to do something otherwise. That kind of helps to keep the sort of oppressive type of forces continuing going. So that's definitely something I think that it's like myself, I have a very nice job and employment, and so I think, like, it can be easy for me to overlook how many ways in which criminalization is used in these ways, and so it's always important to keep reminding myself or ourselves of that.
Is there anything that you can share with us or talk about with your role on the Council of Economic Advisors?
I don't think so I don't want it to get construed as just coming from the White House. But I can talk about my research in general. So what I do there is because of the research that I'm doing. And so more generally, I can talk about, like, before I even joined the Council of Economic Advisors, like last summer, similarly to what Keewa was saying, like, did I pronounce it right?
Yeah.
Last summer, in addition to people wanting to give a lot of money to Black businesses, people wanted to know, Black researchers were in high demand because they wanted to know, like, what is going on? Like, what do we need to do? There's a lot of unrest. There are a lot of things that were getting more coverage than they normally would have. And so last summer, I called upon a lot to talk about the racial wealth gap and inequality. And so even before I was at the Council of Economic Advisors, I could say that the type of research that I did in general, looking at inequality, the issues that were very salient are issues that, at the Council of Economic Advisors are also what would come up. But so to answer your question, I think some key policy issues that we need to look at, one in the labor market and related to what Richard was saying, is that unemployment rates tend to be twice as high for Black people relative to white people. So even before the pandemic happened, we were seeing unemployment rates go to low levels that they hadn't seen in a long time, but there still remained this gap, this systematic gap between Black workers and white workers in terms of unemployment rates. And it's a very persistent ratio. The Black unemployment rate tends to be about 2 times as high as the white unemployment rate. And so that is a part of what people are facing when they're deciding whether to go into formal work or not. And I think that it's something that for a long time had been taken as a given. That, the economy is working as we expect. So one thing I will say that is getting a lot more attention is like, how has it been possible that has just been seen as a normal part of a functioning labor market, that there's this gap that's very persistent in bad times and in good times, there continues to be this gap. And, so I would say that that's something that should be important for policymakers to think about and research to think about and look into. And then the other thing that I think comes to mind from the type of research I do and related to what Keewa was saying was that if you're trying to go into entrepreneurship or self-employment or small business ownership, and you were talking about being alone, a lot of the research shows, in addition to capital and, like your educational background and things like that, having other family members who ran a business or having worked in a business that one of your other family members owned is shown to be a predictor of business success and business survival as your business continues to survive and grow. And so historically, things that cut our elders from having those types of experiences and businesses are things that are gonna recycle themselves into younger generations in terms of finding your way and navigating that type of system. If you don't have as many people to draw on to explain, or just to draw off their own experience to kind of give you a sense of where to look, what to do, what are the successful strategies, that shows up a lot in the research as a barrier. And they'll refer to it as social capital in the literature. Who do you know? Who's your social network? How many people can you just ask about these things? One thing that personally that I found that's related to wealth, but with respect to buying a home, when my wife and I were thinking about buying a home, we were who can we talk to that has done this successfully? And so being in academia, I had to ask one of my coworkers, like, let's have dinner with you. What do you, like, if we wanted to buy a house, what would we do? And it wasn't like we could, easily talk to like, my parents or something like that. And, I was privileged enough to have that access and those type of people in my social network. But, this is how these things kind of propagate, because there's a lot of, information that's commonplace to some people and not to others that leads to very different outcomes. So that also resonated with me. Just if you're thinking about going into owning a small business, and like you need to know where to start, or you need to get some pointers, like the community that you live in and things like segregation really constrain who you're able to tap in order to get the best practices or above and beyond capital, just like the pitfalls, the loopholes, the secrets, the inside baseball. And so that I think is something that really compounds.
I want to preface with what I'm about to say with I love supporting Black-owned businesses. I try to go out of my way to do that. But I have wondered this past year of so-called racial reckoning, Juneteenth was looked at in a different way. It was, let's shop at a Black-owned business. And it felt a little, I don't know, contrived, the optics. And so I'm in no way saying don't support Black-owned businesses. I'm just wondering, like, what is your reaction? It's been treated as a panacea to Black wealth, I felt, over the past year. And just wondering everyone else's thoughts on it, or did they have the same reaction? And not that I'm not begrudging all that money you were getting in last year, Keewa.
Can I one thing there, was that directed to everyone, or
that was for everyone? Yes.
One interesting thing is I'm reading this book on Black banks, written by Marissa Baradaran.
The book that changed my life.
The Color of Money. But something that is argued in that book for banks, but is a general, I think, lesson about buying Black, is that the successful businesses, they should have Black customers. They should just have a lot of customers. They need to have a lot of customers. So like the fact that, and also sometimes they're providing services that other people aren't, they're vital to our community. But I think that I think the goal is that it's not just Black people that are propping up Black businesses, because there's a lot of other income held outside of the Black community. So I think ideally Black businesses could be successful by serving their community, but also by there not being as much entrenched segregation that we have to, keep them from benefiting and providing services to who needs it, and tapping into the overall economy. There's a lot of wealth. This is just with a U.S. perspective, but there's a lot of wealth in the U.S. and businesses probably will be able to. They should provide services that are specific to us, but it's a little interesting to say, like, the community, your own community is like solely responsible for the survival of these businesses, because let's just assume no one else is going to patronize. So, I don't know if that's a good assumption. I think, that there's a base and there's a community that people can draw their support from. And I think it's even better if they have multiple audiences and clientele, so that when something happens in the Black community, for example, that all the businesses don't collapse as well, because they are, leveraged, or, that they have a broad, diversified set of people patronizing them.
I many feelings in the last year about being a Black business owner benefiting from this situation that I couldn't possibly share them all. But it's tricky because if you're a small business and like me, like I'm doing my social media, I'm in the shop. A lot of the times, if you're coming into the shop and you walk in, you're going to see me a lot. And so I am the voice of my brand. Um, and so when your customer base diversifies and when you're not just speaking to people you know who bought your stuff or people who know of you, when you're literally speaking to strangers that you don't know and you don't know what they believe and all of that, it can feel very vulnerable because the 3 years leading up to last year really felt so organic to me, and my success and my customer base and everything just felt like a product of my effort and my ideas. And so all of a sudden, to have people find you or look for you and then buy something, I didn't really know what they expected in return. And so I kind of had to just take a big old grown up breath and just take a breath and then exhale me and just kind of say, hey, if you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't, knowing that they might take it back. They might not like when something happens and I say, when I speak my mind as a Black mother, So as the voice of my brand, if you are someone who doesn't really want to listen to Black women, then you might disappear. You might unfollow. And when that translates into dollars for my business, it's a little scary. And so I have done a lot of working around and figuring out just to really evaluate, it's like you have to re-filter who your customer base is after you have that influx of all these strangers, But I think I have been successful in remaining true to myself, but also, we positivity and making the world a better place. So if you unfollow and you don't like that, then that's cool, and you probably got some issues. Because if you have kids and you're not trying to make the world a better place and you don't want to listen to Black women, then we'll see you on the other side, So it does feel good when you do settle into that core customer group that's different, but you've kept it real and you're being honest. And so if you say, you're gonna say. But it's just been so crazy. It's been so crazy. And so I do feel like now I'm on the other side of feeling very vulnerable with like, who are these people? They're buying all this stuff. Like, what for me? And now I feel like I know what they want. They want what we've always had. They just found it. And they weren't looking for us before,
So I don't have a for-profit business. I have a non-for-profit. So it's my job to give away the money, right? It's to get the money back in the community. So it's a little different. But and I always thought that the Buy Black thing was not for us. It was for other people to buy our stuff. So I don't know if that was like. So I always thought like Buy Black was like, hey, did you know that we got these businesses here that you can support? So that's the way we did. We did a few events last year. It was just like trying to focus on Black businesses and tell people how to get things from there. But on the other end, I think that there's a slight twist on the perspectives here is that there's been, what I'm noticing is that when we post or we talk about what we're fighting against, like there's people who support it. We had an influx of like thousands of followers on social media, other platforms. And when we talk about explicitly what we're fighting against, there's like a million likes, like 1,000 or hundreds of likes, right? They like it. This is trauma. Look at this trauma, and it's like it just tears up. And then the second we start talking about the solution, like there's like echoes, like come on, somebody like this, right? And these are like the new followers, right? Not the people who are organic or kind of like membership or whatever. But and for me, it's just like this romanticization, right, with the problem. But then like lack of curiosity, even at best, as it relates to solutions, right? We put up a post about like Black love, and it's like, 0 likes. You put up a post about like this person just got attacked on 95th, and it's 100. I'm like, the psychology of it is really strange to me. And so we've been talking about, I think one of the projects that we're launching, well, not what I think, we're launching a targeted guaranteed income pilot project. And so we're really, really super excited about it. This is a way that we can use these resources and get them that we gain through, the influx of additional capital and get it back into the hands of people who need it. And then also produce a study to take a look at things like recidivism and income volatility, et cetera. And like, we're nervous about putting the information out because people probably won't like it. I mean, even though we're enthusiastic, we believe the community will be enthusiastic, but the people who kind of came into quote unquote movement formation over the course of the pandemic are looking for trauma, right? That's the only thing that they want to like, the only thing that they're pressed to respond to, or they're just kind of wired that way for some reason but they don't understand that we as Black people are also in the solution making business, right? Like that we also have been, we're creative and we're creating creative solutions to some of the problems that we face. And we want you to be as enthusiastic about those solutions, I think this is a commercial, as you are about the problems that we face. And so, I just figured out a way to throw that out there.
Yeah, what kind of solutions are out there where you feel like people aren't welcoming them?
I think it don't get as much traction on social media. I think as far as in the world of policy and in the world of academia, there's a degree of excitement as it relates to like some alternatives that are being developed. I think in the world of like, what is striking at like when a trauma occurs and you put a picture up about it and you say we want to have a direct action on 95th and whatever, right? There's like there's an outpour like yes. Now if we say we want to do mutual aid in the community and do a block cleanup, there's a lack of enthusiasm as it relates to that. You know what I'm saying? It's like I'm gonna go over here and fight, and so I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both and. Right, so I think the ask is for folks to be as enthusiastic about what we've created and learned over this past, the past year during the pandemic, and probably for 500 years, right? and the things that we're producing that are kind of like changing the material conditions of our people and or alleviating some of the trauma that our folks are facing. So yeah.
I want to read a few comments that have come in via Facebook. Tara says, the reality is that there is still a lot of discrimination against potential employees and deterrence that small business owners encounter if they get access at all. Dominique says, I love that, not waiting on the state for approval. I think that's when we're talking about different regulations for people in the informal economy. And Mark has a question. He says, cell phone-based networking, marketing, and supply chain systems have become important to many granular or atomized informal economies in Africa and Asia. Is anything like that happening in the US? And I don't know if anybody has any expertise on that. So it's okay if no one can answer that.
I was going to say, no, there isn't anything that come to the surface here in the U.S. Well, in Chicago.
And keep the questions or comments flowing. Richard, can you talk about the study that EAT and UIC did earlier? Was it time? I don't even understand time anymore. I don't know if it was 2020 or 2021. It was probably 2020.
It was January 2020.
January. Okay.
Yes. So I had to think myself. I was like, what was it? Yeah, the survival economies report. That was a mixed method research project with qualitative and quantitative. And we surveyed Black informal workers to really understand like the scale and scope of Black informal activity. I think some of it was the first. I mean, I had this idea like in the beginning, like, oh, we're gonna do a report on Black informality, and like I thought the doors would just be open. Like academia would be like, come on in, and the reality was like nobody said yes, right? Like everybody was just like, no, no, no. And then Nick Theodore at UIC School of Urban Planning was like, Rich, let's do this. He had already been doing work around informality before that, and so we're able to do quantitative and qualitative interviews. I think some of the highlights from that study is that just the rate of people, the rate of the respondents, like one was that 40% of the respondents had never had a full-time job that paid a regular check. 40% of the folks had never had an occupation that paid a regular check. And so as you can think, it tells a lot. And then also one of the things is like an entry, like people were entering the informal economy at 14 and they're now like 60 years old and they're still engaged in the informal economy. So like the range of the life, the time that folks were spending in informality. So it's a great study. It's called the Survival Economies Report. I can make sure that folks get a link to it and send it out after this.
And the other thing that stood out to me, besides the stat that you mentioned, was that people just don't stay in one lane in the informal economy. They do multiple.
Yeah, that was one of the things that stood up.
I was going to ask a question. Yeah. I'll let you finish your follow-up question on what you were talking about.
No, yeah, that was just it. It's like they had multiple hustles, and I think when we first started, we thought we were going to do this like a hair braiders association and a loose square workers association, and then we found out the loose square person was also selling braiding hair on the side and was doing childcare in the morning. So it was like it's all just it's loosely fit. But go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to ask after doing that study, do you think that that type of information you collected made the picture look more rosy or more bleak, or was it a mix? Like, does it make it look like things aren't as bad as we're told, or that things are worse, or was it a mix thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the first iteration, this is without any resources. What it did is that it sharpened it sharpened definitions for the floor in our economy, right? Like, what exactly are people that are outside of the formal economy doing to survive in neighborhoods like West Garfield Park, where the per capita income is one of the lowest in the city? So it actually was able to give a picture of like, this is how our folks are engaging. And then you can also see from that how, there's strands that indicate how criminality plays a part in this, and the retention of workers in this space. And so I think as an initial report, it just gave like baseline data and sharpened the analysis of like the floor, if that makes sense.
Rick, I know that you wanted to be a bystander to listen, but would love to bring you into this conversation to hear your reflections on what we've been talking about.
It's been really great. I mean, it's been really great. I can kind of sum up my thinking and what I've been hearing in these three examples from the three speakers, which was really kind of fascinating to me because, I came into this project thinking about how one of the big gaps for me about, the economic plight of Black people is information, and that as a resource. And then when I hear Damon early on said something that was really fascinating to me about the invisibility of wealth, which is kind of an interesting thing, right? And it's tied to the other things that Keewa and Richard, spoke of, because if you talk about and I don't know how, I'm not certain that I was interpreting what Damon said the way that he was meaning it, but when he said the invisibility of wealth, what I started to see was the invisibility, the challenges that Keewa talked about of not having knowledge or information that was available to her, because, the wealth that is generated among us is invisible to us. we don't have that, in front of us. And then on the reverse of that, when Richard was talking about the how informal kind of informal entrepreneurship is passed on from generation to generation. Because that's where we get our information from, right? We get our information from the people that are in proximity to us, and for some reason we don't have a good flow of information that people can, unless you're fortunate enough to be in a position as Damon said, even just buying a house, you gotta for many of us, you have to be in a network where you can get access to information because it's not readily available. And which takes me to the kind of a cynical part of this notion of invisibility of wealth for me is kind of, Damon said it's like so people don't really necessarily want you to know about their wealth. When people are really, in wealth, and I'm wondering if y'all think that that's a challenge, right? That as we have a growing middle class of Black people that are having experiences and gaining wealth, but they kind of want to be like many other wealthy people. They don't want to expose themselves to being, because it's a privacy matter, in a sense. So I'm curious about your thoughts on that.
I thought, something that happened very recently, and my family is so interesting. I love my family. I'm closest with one of my brothers, and he went to Dartmouth for economics. And so our whole kind of adult life, I've texted to him. I always call and I say, okay, tell me, because I'm the, starving artist who the path to wealth is so invisible to me. But what was interesting is that at the same time as the Tulsa Centennial, my brother tells me of a story of a classmate of his from Dartmouth that he recently reconnected with. And they were having drinks and whatever, and somehow it came out. He knew that this guy was like legacy wealth. He never behaved as if he even had to work. And it came out just recently, after they've been knowing each other for years and years, that he was a Tulsa descendant of one of the first banks. And this is a white guy. And so side by side, this is my brother, so he's also a descendant. Side by side, you have somebody who has a trust, does not have to work, has such immense wealth from being a descendant of Tulsa white people. And my brother, who knows of having everything destroyed and basically us having to build back something that will never equal what we had as a descendant of Tulsa Black. And it's crazy because, I just always, it really is access to information because, as much as Black people talk about our whole check being taken, from taxes, I've always known that white people don't necessarily complain about that. Like, what do you know? What do you put on your tax sheet that we don't know to do on our taxes? Or, how do you, like you said about home buying, we live in Hyde Park, and I remember always driving through Kenwood and driving through Beverly as a child and seeing these big houses and just before Zillow or whatever, not even knowing how much a house like that would cost and not having no idea what the person who lived in that house, like what they just did for a living or what, like just having no idea. Whereas if you grew up a different way, you would easily know, like, oh, somebody in that house and you know what they do or don't do. And it really does impact your whole view of what's possible or what's not. And when you don't have that information, you have to work so hard to try to figure it out. It's like a maze.
One thing I would add to that, to respond to what Rick was saying about people being secretive about their wealth. This is now like a meme you'll see on Twitter or social media. You'll see this article, how a young 20-year-old, 20-something person ended up buying a house or property and made it and became a millionaire. And every time you look into the fine print, it's like, and then I got to this point and my parents bought me a house. Or then I got to this point and I took my inheritances and I invested in it, well. And so it was all my know-how. And I think part of the desire to hide your wealth and where you come from is that it undermines the idea of meritocracy. People would like to have, you believe that they just made it on their own, that they earned and they deserve everything they have. And if you talk about how much of a lottery it is, you're lucky that your parents, did this, or you're lucky that your parents did that, or you're lucky you were born in this community and not that one, or that someone just passed on some wealth to you. People's own identity and how they view themselves, that is it's in contention with what the reality is, and it also makes it easier for people to think that society is fair and that things don't need to change kind of fundamentally. So another motive to hide that wealth is to avoid coming to grips with that reality. Like, you were born on third base, and other things like that. So I think that's another motivation. And then that makes you think that you're a failure. And, you're seeing someone else getting different results. And you're like, what is wrong, with my process, or, what did I do wrong to deserve this? And then there are these hidden, unobservable factors, people passing down wealth and inheriting wealth and things like that, are swept under the rug and people aren't as interested in bringing up.
That's how I feel whenever I see 20-something-year-olds on House Hunters. That's the fine print. Who gave them the money for the down payment?
I mean, when Kylie Jenner was on that magazine for being self-made billionaire, I mean, I almost burned down the house. I mean, you just get so angry that my Wolverine spikes came out of my hands, and I just felt so furious.
I was furious too, and luckily I was able to write a scathing column in the Sun-Times about it, about how awful and wrong that was.
Oh man, just the perception of it. It's like, that is powerful. Like Damon said, it's powerful in itself, and it just it's wrong.
Well, but one of the things though that I Natalie hear me talk about this all the time, because I have this dream. I have a dream that somewhere out there it has to be, right? So how do we? I mean, I always use the story of my studio in Houston that's on a block of, probably unemployment on my block is like well over 50%, and I mean, in the main money that's coming into my block is the drug dealers. That's where so I see these young kids around, and they're walking up and down. They pass by my studio all the time. They don't really know what I do or whatever, but they're always looking around, and I just think about it. I said, what information are these young folks getting about the possibility of their life? And they're not getting anything that is inspiring them to move in a direction that might, that might improve the economic condition, in the legal context, right? And so, and I kind of go back to, Richard's thing about, I call it the deficit model, but how we all get excited about talking about the bad stuff, the things that are, terrible, but we haven't quite figured out how to really, find ways to integrate, these inspirational things that people are doing. I mean, yes, I agree with everybody on here that there are many people that are, they go off to self-made, whatever, but they're really not, right? But there are the people that, really, dig themselves. I mean, they do interesting things, and they're interesting, but it doesn't get the same kind of, as Richard said, it doesn't get the same kind of play, that it would, when, somebody, I mean, so yeah. I'm on my block, you know, and I'm making art and selling art and going out and doing stuff, you know, whatever. Nobody really knows about that. I don't talk about that. But then, you know, somebody on the block gets like, you know, shot or whatever. Then also, it's like everybody's, you know, talking about that. So how do we shift that around though, and get some of that information about, you know, what people are doing that is uplifting or should be uplifting and inspirational to people that are, you know, in the positions that, you know, that Richard talks about, you know, people that are, you know, I mean, they're hustling, you know?
Well, that's where I feel like, you know, that's why I feel like my brick and mortar is important, is as important of a symbol as it is, you know, for me to feed my family. Like where I'm situated, there are a lot of beautiful hood families that are going to this blingy jewelry store next door or going to H&M or wherever. And when I first opened the shop, I had several instances where my people would peek their head in and they were afraid to even come in the shop just based on how it looked. It looked like a nice boutique. Mm-hmm. And there was that fear there that like made me so sad, but also makes me even more of a like, I'm always like, excuse me. I'm like, come in, please. Like, don't do that. Don't just peek your head in. There is such it's just like a relationship or a friendship or anything else. You know, there's this fear of rejection and not even wanting to put yourself in a situation to be rejected for who you truly are, that you won't even go in. And so because they don't know that it's Black owned when you just see the sign and you never heard of it, I always make it a point to be like, you know, I'll overhear people in the slightest whispers, my people say, oh, you know, it's probably expensive. Like, and I'll jump in and I'll say, hey, we got these books for under $10, or this little thing costs $8, or whatever it is, just to break that down and show them like, you know, I feel like being present is so powerful. And I've had women email me and DM me all the time who are either mothers or have some idea that they just know that they don't want to go into another workplace and be rejected because of their hair or their fashion or whatever they prioritize in life that may not be the white norm. And I'm always like, do it, go, make it happen. If you need any help, whatever, come at me, because they're just not enough places in our reach that are welcoming like that. And so, and what you talk about in the informal economy, that's all it is. It's just a bunch of entrepreneurs that literally don't want to ask permission from the system that rejects them. And so, you know, they're just doing it themselves to avoid that rejection. And it's like, we should make it easier to, you know, legitimize businesses. There shouldn't be as many hoops to go through to, you know, to have a storefront or whatever. But until then, you know, more power to them for figuring it out, because the rejection is old, it's crusty, and I don't want to, you know, I'm not doing this.
Well, we are at 7 o'clock, everybody. So I want to thank our panelists for a great discussion. Thanks to the audience on the webinar and wherever else they're watching. And I want to plug the next Chop It Up in this Black Wealth series, Black Economy. It will be July 8th, so stay tuned. And keep a lookout for all the great stuff that is coming out of Black Wall Street Journey with Rick Lowe. So, good night, everyone.
I'm moving the screen, do you see? I cannot cut it out. It's not cutting. Look.